Okay, welcome everybody. I'm here with Mr. Mark Millar, the great mind of comics. Since, I don't know, since 2000 from now, is changing the pop culture, I think. Well, thank you for being here, Mark. I'm going to start with some question about your creative process. For
Okay.
example, I noticed that your characters somehow has these elements of the archetypes of Carl Jung. Did you ever study it or work with the Jung theory of psychology, or is it just a coincidence?
Never. I've actually always been suspicious of that kind of thing. Like for me, it's more instinctive. That we hear quite a lot about, the hero's journey. This
Ah,
idea that that stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end based on the solar cycle of the
okay,
hero.
exactly.
And I think you can overanalyze these things because sometimes you just know instinctively what a story is supposed to be. So the hero's journey, we all know inside of us. We don't need to refer to it, and have a look at, are we doing the right thing at the right point in the story? Because you just know yourself whenever you're doing it. So anything you see that looks clever is entirely accidental and subconscious.
Perfect, because your characters sometimes enters perfectly to that archetype. It's amazing, and it's even more amazing that that is just coincidence.
But if you think about it though, like those archetypes came from somewhere and it came from inside of people.
Yes,
So the
is
story
the
we want to see the hero beaten, but then rising up again and taking the bad guy down and so on. So these stories are as old as man, really. So all Young and anyone else did was look at stories that already work that we liked and we wanted to see.
yes, not that about of the hero journey, about the character. For example, Jason from Jupiter's Legacy, he's Apollo. He's
Right.
the numbers of Apollo. He behaves like Apollo. For example, Bonnie Black is at Athena. Cordelia is Artemis because she always wants to be free.
Yeah.
So it's a coincidence, really good coincidence, because I thought, wow, these all these characters fits perfectly. But I imagine also is because all these histories is part from our culture from centuries. So
Absolutely, but also there's something about characters. Like I think storytelling and writing is slightly supernatural, is a little bit odd, like because
yes,
like Superman, Green Lantern, The Flash, these guys don't exist, and yet we feel we know them, and we know when they're being done wrong. And sometimes it's 20 or 30 years before they're done correctly, before someone comes in and does them properly. So it's not as if it's always the creators who get it right. Sometimes it's a journey before the characters start to develop their real personalities. So I
exactly.
do almost feel that these archetypes exist outside of man and that we're just tapping into them. So when I'm sitting doing something like Magic Order, where did Cordelia Moonstone come from? Where did her name even come from? So these things are conjured out of thin air. And I don't want to sound too pretentious about it, but there is something about it that whenever you're sitting writing a story, when you're plotting it, you know when you've taken a correct turn and you know when you've taken a wrong turn because it's almost like the story already exists. Stephen King has a great description for this. Stephen King said a writer is an archaeologist who's finding something under the sand that's already there, and your job is to try and bring it to the surface without breaking it.
Of
And I
course.
think that's a perfect description.
Okay, it's exactly that's true. But in other ideas, do you ever consider to direct a film or a series? Now you're on Netflix, maybe one of
Yeah.
your creations. You have
I,
to direct one chapter.
yeah,
You have
I've
that
dipped my toe into it. Ridley Scott asked me years ago. He said he thought I'd be good at it because comic books and film can be pretty similar, and he thought I had a very filmic style. And he suggested that I take part in this little thing he was doing, where he was getting 8 young filmmakers. This was years ago, and he said would give you a modest budget. I forget what it was, but it was a very modest amount of
I
filming.
remember the movie that when came out chronology. The,
Well, exactly. So I started putting something together, and then I said, "Well, could this be bigger than a 15-minute short feature to be released online?" And it became Chrononauts. So I made it Chrononauts instead, which became a much bigger story than I could have afforded for the $300,000 or something that I had as my
of course.
budget. So yeah, I think there's two. I think writers and directors are generally different types of people. You know, like I've dipped my toe into it a little bit, and I think the thing that puts me off is doing the same thing for 2 years. I think I find that really boring. Like I'm really lucky that in this past year I've done 5 different projects. You know,
Wow.
3 of them in comics and 3 of them outside of comics. You know, and I really love that. You know, the idea that every few weeks I'm doing something else. It must maybe it's ADHD or something, but I really like the idea of as soon as I'm bored in one thing, I can just jump onto the next. Whereas if you're doing a movie, it's such a commitment, isn't it? You know,
Yes, indeed.
plus I'd have to start at the very bottom, which I find really boring as well. Like nobody's going to say, "Here's $200 million, go and make Spider-Man 5." You
Probably. Okay. Now in comics, do you think that the long continuity in comics, that excessively long continuity in comics, are I don't know, making people fatigue or people boring, or I don't know, because I love your works because it's like a mini series.
know?
It's middle, start, and finish, like a trilogy,
Yeah.
and move forward because you have to explode that character. Of course, Marvel, DC, they have all these characters and they want to explode them until they go 100 years. And Mr. Miller creates a Superman free of rights. But right now, this continuity is a good thing to me. No, to me, is getting. I'm tired of that continuity.
Me too. I mean, if you think about it, Spider-Man and these characters have been around for over 60 years now, since before I was born. And the DC heroes have been around almost 90 years, which is before anyone was born. So I think continuity can strangle stories in that sense. But I think there's 2 different types of writers. I think there's the writers who make continuity work for them, and that's the guys who love the history, and they have decades worth of knowledge on these characters, and they like to fit their stories in around these old stories. And then there's guys like me, Frank Miller, Garth Ennis. We've got a slightly different approach where we like to come in with a blank piece of paper and just try and do something that anyone can read. And I actually think both are really, really good. It's good that we have both types of writer because I think long-term comic fans really like to see where this all fits into continuity. Like when I was a kid, I did. But now the continuity is so vast, I think it's really hard to write an X-Men story if you haven't read what I don't know how many there's been, a couple of thousand X-Men comics now when you add up all the miniseries. And somebody's going to say, "Oh my God, Jubilee hates that guy. Do you not remember that series from 22 years ago?" And I'm like, I'm lost with that stuff. So that's why I'm really lucky that I have, my career has been alternate versions of things, so in the mainstream. So like the Red Sun for Superman, the Ultimates for the Avengers.
The Ultimates. Oh my goodness, the
Great.
Ultimates.
Yeah.
The Ultimates to me is perfect. The
Oh,
Ultimates. It's perfect. Perfect.
if I'd been given the Avengers, it wouldn't have felt right, probably. So giving me that blank piece of paper and getting to work with somebody like Brian Hitch, I mean that was where we could reinvent the wheel. To me, that creatively was much more exciting. So I've always been inspired more by guys like Frank Miller who just come in, do the job, and leave. I think.
Okay. Like a killer. You say like a killer.
Frank Miller said that. He said a good comic book guy is like an assassin. He sneaks in, does the job, and then gets out before anyone
like
sees.
like George Costanza. Remember, he says a joke and goes out of the room. He wins. Well, I read recently many Marvel comics, and sometimes that the continuity is getting confusing, but I still love Marvel a lot to read Marvel. Okay, let's go to Psychic Sam, sir. Where it comes this idea of this psychic vigilante, like a Professor X meets it with a Punisher. This project is really interesting. And what is different because working with Kickstarter or normal comics, I think I interviewed years ago by email and asked you, you want to do a Kickstarter? And you say, of course, I want to work with other people's money and do this because money, comics are expensive. People don't know, but comics are really expensive to make. Really, I think it's more expensive than people think there is.
Way more, especially if you pay good rates. I mean, a typical comic. I mean, not even counting my own wage. Because I for years now I haven't taken any money from comics.
Wow.
But like for 7 years, 8 years. But even just to pay the artist, the colorist, the letterer, and everything, you could be $2,000 a page. You know, if it's a really expensive artist, you know, like the highest high-end guy who's coming in from Marvel and DC is maybe getting $1,500 a page, you know. So you're out at least $40,000 an issue, you know. So it's very expensive to put a comic together. Not everybody gets paid that kind of cash, you know, but certainly guys who've worked their way up to that, you know, and work at that level, you know.
And Saki-san, you decided to work to Kickstarter. What is the positive to work to Kickstarter?
Well, I like to try different things, you know, like whenever I started in comics, the only way you could do it was the traditional model. But now we have digital comics, which hasn't really quite caught on in the West yet, but it'll probably come in some format because it's doing gangbusters around the world, like Japan in particular. But like, I do think digital just hasn't broken through here yet. Direct to consumer, you know, bookstores, forget about it. When I started in comics, there was no comics you could sell in bookstores. You were lucky if you saw Watchmen and Dark Knight in there, and that was kind of it. Maybe Mouse as well. But
No.
like now you can get any comic in a bookstore. You can order it on Amazon and so on. So there's all these amazing ways of selling comics, and direct to consumer for the creator is the best one because you keep all the cash. You know, it all comes back to the to the creative team, which is the dream of any creative person. You know, so like it's just you and the reader, which is wonderful. So yeah, I love it. And where it came from, the idea, I really love stories about a guy with a gun who goes out and kills bad people. I love those stories, you know. And every now and then that becomes fashionable in pop culture. And usually it's times when there's economic chaos, when the streets are unsafe, when the police stations are closing down and everything, you know. So 1970s New York was perfect for that. The city was going bankrupt. You know, crime was off the scale. And we're kind of getting there again, you know, like the America we've seen in particular for the last, I mean, London too, but for the last.
Taxi driver era, the taxi driver era. 70s.
Yeah, exactly. It feels like that again, where, you know, everybody's arguing with each other and they're looking for simple solutions, you know. So you might be scared to go to your local corner store because you're going to get mugged. So that's when these characters are really attractive, the Frank Castle type characters, just some fantasy of a guy who comes in and takes out all the muggers. And I wanted to do that, but I didn't want to do the same old thing. You know, whenever I do something, when I play with an archetype, I like to mix it up a little bit. So the idea here is a very simple one, which is imagine a guy like the Punisher or whatever, you know, just a sort of a blue collar big guy, you know, who's pretty, you know, pretty tough. But imagine he finds out 24 hours before a murder that is going to happen. Like he has something whispered in his ear that he hears, and it tells him there's going to be a death and a murder, and the only way he can stop it is by killing the murderer. So he's like, okay, I'm a truck driver. I've never killed anyone before, but if I don't kill this bad guy, he's going to kill an innocent person. And he ignores it at first, and he feels terrible because he sees the bodies piling up. But then he sees something terrible happening to a child, and he's like, I can't stand aside and let this happen. So he goes out and starts his killing spree. Now imagine he then gets picked up by the police and he says to the police, "Oh yeah, a voice in my head told me to do this and everything," you know. So he just sounds, he sounds completely crazy.
See, this guy is going to the doghouse. Puts in jail immediately.
And Johnny Romita drawing it with Klaus Janson. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. If you're going to do a Martin Scorsese style urban crime story, you want Johnny. I mean, that's like having Scorsese and De Niro in it, isn't it? I mean, that's
yes, of course. John Romita Jr. was, I think, the first Spider-Man I read was a child in the 80s, was John Romita Jr.
I mean, everybody's first Spider-Man, everybody who's alive now, practically, their first Spider-Man was John Romita Jr.
and right now he's drawing some amazing Spider-Man. I'm reading only those Spider-Man that he's drawing because he's playing with the panels. He's playing with the splash pages. He turn around. He's the Italian stallion. He's the Italian stallion.
We've worked together 3 times now. We did Wolverine Enemy of the State 20 years ago. 5 years later, we did Kick-Ass. And now we're doing this. You know, so we've had a certain amount of good luck working together. I like it. You always have that handy, just always on your desk. You know?
I have really protected it.
And if you stand up a little, that's a Kick-Ass t-shirt, I think.
Yes, it's a Kick-Ass.
Perfect.
Yeah, John Romita Jr., of course. And to be not confused, I'm Dave, and this is Dave, because I know.
I'm not confused. I know who's who. Don't worry. You know?
Take it easy. For example, another question. in nightclub too, I remember I talked to you about the dam, the press. I don't know to have to say spoilers, but the dam is a pivot point to
Yes.
nightclub book two. I think
you helped me out.
well, I have DM with you. I am so glad. I help you with that. But you're going to do some new books with some civil engineering problems, or because I love that idea and that rule of the vampires that you said that they can touch water was perfect. Was perfect.
Yes.
I don't know, like love to me is the Lost Boys, but refresh it in some good way.
One of the guys at Netflix, one of the film team said, "It's Lost Boys meets Spider-Man," which is a perfect description for it. You know, which is
Lost Boy meets Kick-Ass, because I think
it's got the same vibe. Yeah.
Let's change the archetype.
Well, Kick-Ass was my 2000s version of Spider-Man. You know, because Dave Lazuski is Peter Parker. Really, he's Peter Parker without powers. He's a kid living with a single parent. Who's kind of he's down on his luck, not liked at school.
I have a theory of Kick-Ass.
Oh yeah,
a theory. In the final issue, issue number one, Kick-Ass, the first one, the final issue one, and the start of issue number two, Dave got hit by a car, and he undresses and go to the hospital. But I think he got so injured that he can't do that. Is that a plot? There's a Easter egg. Somebody help him, because I think somebody should help him. I think I'm going to share to everybody the page, exactly page, because
what it might be though is somebody in the ambulance just cut it off him, because he's not. He was naked when he woke up in hospital.
Exactly, that same thing.
There is another theory. I put a tiny little Easter egg.
Okay, he's beaten to death, and then he undressed himself and go to the hospital. How he can be alive? How can he do that? I always thought that.
Oh no, he was found by an ambulance. He was taken in an ambulance.
Yes, he taken an ambulance. He's beaten. He's almost dead, and his dad went to the hospital. He broke all his bones and everything. I always thought that somebody helped him.
His butler. Wouldn't it be great if he's a butler just taking care of stuff we don't know about, all the time?
Exactly, that cleaned all the mess. Because
I'll tell you a little Easter egg that I've never told anyone that's in the story. Dave gets hit by a car, right? And he ends up in hospital.
Of course.
And if you look in the very last issue of Kick-Ass 3, you see somebody walking along a hospital corridor, and you see Dave still in a hospital bed, and his dad's still alive and sitting beside him. And his name is on the board as D. Lazuski. And you're like, oh my God. And has he dreamt this whole thing? Or is it just somebody else called D. Lazuski? But has the whole thing been his fantasy while he was hit by that car?
Well, that's going to be that's a new.
But go back and have a look, you'll see it.
Okay, no, I don't have the link. Maybe I
Dave, I'm going to have to jump because it's our next one. Like Sarah's got me 3 back-to-back interviews just now, so I have to jump for the next guy. But
don't worry, sir.
Fantastic, face-to-face. Great to see you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Say hi to Venezuela. We love.
And you met Sarah as well, which is great. She sends you something every week, I think, doesn't she? She sends you like PDFs and everything.
Sarah, of course. I talk to Sarah every week. I bother Sarah every week. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All the best, then.
A pleasure. Thank you.